On June 24, 1941, amidst the overwhelming German advance into Lithuania, one Soviet KV-2 tank crew made a courageous stand near Raseiniai. As the Red Army retreated, this lone tank deliberately positioned itself to impede the enemy's progress, a desperate act to buy precious time until reinforcements could arrive. Against all odds, this valiant crew held up the entire 6th Panzer Division for a full day, blocking the crucial road that the Germans needed to continue their invasion as part of Operation Barbarossa. Outnumbered and outgunned, the KV-2 fought relentlessly until its last shell was fired and its last crew member fell. But when the smoke finally cleared, an extraordinary act of respect would follow. The initial stages of Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union launched on June 22, 1941, were characterized by a swift and brutal blitzkrieg. Following successful annexations in Central Europe and a non-aggression pact with Stalin that carved up Poland, Hitler turned his war machine eastward. Over 4 million Axis soldiers surged across a massive 2,500-kilometer front, catching the Soviet forces largely unprepared. In the early days, the German Panzer Divisions advanced seemingly unopposed, pushing back the Soviet armies with alarming speed. It appeared that Moscow might fall within weeks. However, beneath the initial shock, the vast resources of the Soviet Union began to stir. Tens of thousands of fresh recruits were mobilized, and a slow but steady regrouping began. While Army Group North encountered relatively little resistance in penetrating Soviet defenses, the capture of the Lithuanian city of Raseiniai proved to be a more significant obstacle than anticipated. The German objective was to secure strategic river crossings, the Neman and the Bisa rivers near Kaunas, and the village of Raseiniai itself. Over 250 German tanks from Camp Gruppsraus and von Seckendorf, part of the 4th Panzer Group within the 6th Panzer Division, moved through the town, seizing their initial objectives. However, their advance was abruptly halted by the appearance of a formidable new enemy, one they had little prior knowledge of: the Soviet KV-2 heavy tank. The Kleinman-Voroshiloff Tank II, or KV-2, was a behemoth of steel whose thick armor rendered it impervious to every German panzer and anti-tank weapon then in service. The eager German infantry were about to discover this harsh reality firsthand. Named after the Soviet People's Commissar and Minister for Defense, Marshal Kleinman-Voroshiloff, the KV-2 was developed in the months leading up to the Soviet-Finnish War. This massive vehicle measured over 6.5 meters long and 3.25 meters high, weighing in at a staggering 52 tons. Its crew of 6 operated a 152mm M10 howitzer as its main armament, supported by 2 DP-27 machine guns. The KV-2's defining feature was its revolutionary armor, which proved completely resistant to the 3.7cm and 7.5cm guns mounted on the ubiquitous German Panzer III and IV tanks. The KV-2 also shrugged off most German anti-tank weapons, forcing infantry to resort to desperate tactics like attacking from the flanks or rear, or relying on direct fire from the powerful 8.8cm flak guns, primarily anti-aircraft weapons pressed into a ground support role. The KV-2 had seen its first action during the Winter War against Finland, where these slow but heavily armored beasts lumbered towards the Finnish Mannerheim line, seemingly impervious to enemy fire. However, the Finns, lacking effective anti-tank weaponry, eventually found ways to disable them using grenades, Molotov cocktails, and satchel charges. The seemingly invincible tanks were not entirely so. One notable incident during the Winter War saw a lone KV-2 attack Finnish positions. Unable to penetrate its armor, the Finns could only hide as the tank roamed, firing its howitzer and machine guns. After a time, it withdrew but returned hours later. Finnish engineers managed to lay anti-tank mines, immobilizing the tank. The Soviet crew remained inside, continuing to fire sporadically. Under the cover of night, the engineers placed 60 kilograms of explosives behind the turret, and the resulting blast detonated the tank's remaining ammunition. Returning to the Battle of Raseiniai, when the advancing German Panzer 35T formations encountered the armored columns of over 750 Soviet KV tanks on June 22nd, the ground literally trembled. The Germans were shocked to discover that their 3.7cm guns barely scratched the KV-2's thick armor. To make matters worse, the Germans, the entire Soviet motorized defense force launched a fierce counterattack against the German garrison. Despite a failed flanking maneuver, the sheer weight of the Soviet armor allowed them to break through German infantry and artillery lines. Ferocious close-quarters combat erupted between infantry, tanks, and artillery. The Germans quickly regrouped, tightening their lines and engaging from a distance to avoid further losses to the KV-2's powerful cannons. The Soviet tanks inflicted as much damage as possible before their ammunition ran out. Incredibly, when they were out of shells, some Soviet tank crews simply drove their massive vehicles over German anti-tank guns. According to Maxim Kolomayets, editor-in-chief of Front Illustration magazine, a German captain named Zellwak wrote in his diary, "This morning, like our headquarters, and I reached the road fork northeast of Raseiniai, panic set in. A few super-heavy Russian tanks broke through our positions, went to our rear, and caused great confusion and destruction. A large number of vehicles, guns, and even 150mm howitzers, which fired at the last, were simply crushed and rolled into the ground. The situation was overshadowed by the fact that our guns did not penetrate his armor. I myself saw from a close distance how this Russian monster received 8 direct hits from our 75mm tank gun and quite calmly drove on. The close air support provided by Luftwaffe proved crucial in helping the German panzer groups counterattack. The Luftwaffe provided extensive support to halt the Soviet advance, while the Germans began deploying their powerful 88mm anti-aircraft guns, the only weapons they had that stood a chance of destroying the Soviet KV-2's. Only then did the German forces begin to gain control of the battlefield. As the surviving Soviet tanks sought cover from the devastating 88mm fire, German infantry stealthily approached from behind and attached magnetic, sticky bombs to their tracks, immobilizing them and making them vulnerable to further attack. The 6th Panzer Division suffered significant losses, around 200 men, 30 tanks, and 40 motorcycles, but they managed to push back the remaining KV-2 tanks. By late afternoon, Combat Group Seckendorf received reinforcements, allowing them to eliminate the last pockets of Soviet resistance. During the night of June 23rd, the local Lithuanian civilians witnessed a lone, battered KV-2 tank move onto the main road and position itself directly in the middle, effectively blocking any further vehicle movement. This was a crucial back road used by the Germans for supplying their advancing forces. For the next 5 days of the battle, the tank remained stationary. Witnesses initially believed the crew had simply run out of fuel, abandoned the vehicle during the night, and forgotten about it. Then, on the morning of June 24th, a convoy of Soviet prisoners and wounded German soldiers approached the road and observed the lone KV-2 from a distance. The German vanguard assumed it was simply a derelict vehicle, left to rust. But then, something astonishing happened. One of the front drivers watched in disbelief as the tank's massive turret slowly began to turn, eventually stopping with its 152mm howitzer aimed directly at their convoy. He blinked, puzzled, and an instant later, a whistling sound tore through the air, the shell passing dangerously close. The Germans immediately ordered a retreat, rushing back to their base to request more tanks to deal with the seemingly abandoned KV-2. But they were already losing precious time. Just an hour later, a convoy of 12 trucks carrying vital fuel and ammunition was utterly destroyed by the lone KV-2, still stubbornly blocking the road. Traffic jams rapidly formed on both sides of the obstruction. The German offensive was being brought to a standstill by a single Soviet tank, baking under the Lithuanian sun. Colonel Erhard Rouse, the commander of the 6th Panzer Division's reconnaissance battalion, quickly dispatched troops to eliminate the tank. A battery of 450mm anti-tank guns fired 7 shots directly at the KV-2. However, the shells simply bounced off its thick armor. Then, the tank's turret slowly turned, aimed at the German gun crews, and fired its massive howitzer. The KV-2 remained immobile, but Colonel Rouse ordered an 88mm anti-aircraft gun to be brought forward to destroy from a distance of 700 meters. While the German crew frantically prepared their weapon, the tank remained silent. Then, in a sudden burst of action, the KV-2 fired a single incredibly accurate shot, destroying the 88mm gun and its crew. Colonel Rouse later recalled the incredible scene. It turned out that the crew and the tank commander had nerves of iron. They coolly watched the approach of the anti-aircraft gun without disturbing it, since as long as the gun was moving, it posed no threat to the tank. Then came a critical moment in the duel of nerves, when the crew began to prepare the anti-aircraft gun for the shot. It was time for the tank crew to act. While the gunners, terribly nervous, pointed and loaded the gun, the tank turned the turret and fired first. The KV-2 then proceeded to eliminate the other two 20mm anti-aircraft guns that had been brought along. Recognizing the futility of direct fire, Colonel Rouse decided to send sappers with dynamite to finally get rid of the stubborn tank. However, they would have to wait until the cover of darkness. Meanwhile, as the sun began to set, another attack by infantry carrying explosives also failed. But when morning finally arrived, Colonel Rouse mobilized a column of panzers to distract the KV-2, drawing its attention while a team of infantry carrying explosives cautiously approached from behind, using the cover of the disabled vehicles. While the KV-2 desperately tried to aim its massive turret at the maneuvering German tanks, the infantrymen made a dash for the immobile Soviet behemoth. They threw grenades through the existing damage holes in the armor, hoping to finally neutralize the crew. They then scrambled for cover, and a short time later, the KV-2 erupted in a final, violent explosion. Upon inspecting the charred remains of the tank, the Germans discovered the bodies of 6 Soviet soldiers. Colonel Erhard Rouse and his men were so deeply impressed by the extraordinary bravery and tenacity of this lone KV-2 crew that they decided to bury them with full military honors. In 1965, the remains were transferred to a cemetery in Raseiniai. To this day, the names of these 6 incredibly courageous road warriors remain unknown. Their sacrifice a powerful testament to the fierce resistance faced by the German invaders in the early days of Operation Barbarossa. Their single-handed stand, holding up an entire Panzer Division for a crucial day, serves as a poignant reminder of the individual acts of heroism that can alter the course of even the most massive military offensives.